welcome you all to the 2025 Citrus Educational Conference. I'm Joshua Dawson. I'm a county extension agent in Valdosta, Georgia, with Fort Valley State University. I also like to thank SQM for sponsoring the 2025 Citrus Educational Conference. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Mary Sutton. She is the UGA Citrus Specialist.
Thank you. Like he said, my name is Mary Sutton, and I am the new Citrus Extension Specialist with the University of Georgia. And I've just started this role back in August, so I'm still trying to get a handle on everything up here in Georgia. But before we get started today, there are a few business items we need to take care of. The first is that the Georgia Citrus Association is having their big meeting on February 25th of this year. So you can find more information at thegeorgiacitrusassociation.org. Also, this will be the first year that the Department of Agriculture is collecting the citrus commodity tax. And so I've got information up here on how to do that. There's a letter with instructions, as well as the forms you'll need to fill out as a grower, as well as a packer. So come see me after this if you do need these forms. Okay, so on to the meat of this. I thought we would just kind of start with a brief update on what the citrus industry is looking like here in Georgia. So we know that most of our citrus is grown in the southern half of the state, and I've tried to highlight the counties where it's being grown, but like I said, I am still new, so I'm still trying to get out and meet everyone. So if I've missed your county, let me know and I can update this for the future. And while it is just in the South, this is a steadily growing industry. In 2020, the farm gate value for citrus was $8.8 million, and in 2022, it was up to $22.4 million. So, I mean, we've almost tripled over the course of 3 years, and we expect that growth to continue over the next few years, especially as we have about 600,000 trees in the state right now, and many of these are still juvenile. So as those trees start reaching a bearing age, we expect production is going to continue to increase. And on top of that, more trees are being planted every year. So again, we're just going to keep seeing more and more citrus here in the state. And as of right now, most of our citrus are in these really well-protected little isolated pockets throughout South Georgia. So even though we're covering pretty much the whole bottom of the state, these citrus trees are pretty well protected as of right now. But as we continue expanding and putting in more citrus, they're going to have to go in the areas where citrus already exists. So to kind of give you an idea of what I'm talking about, here is a quick Google Maps view of an area down in South Georgia. And so let's see if I can make you can see the scale for 1 mile. So this covers a pretty big area, and there's our citrus grove. And so it's really well protected. It's surrounded by other farmland, by pines, so it's protected from the wind. It's got pretty good isolation from disease and other pests. And that's great, especially when you compare it to somewhere like South Florida. So here's Central Florida, and it's the same scale as the map on the left, but all of that is citrus. So they have thousands and thousands of acres of citrus just right next to each other. So it's a lot easier for diseases and pests to move through Central Florida, and they don't have some of those nice big windbreaks like we do up here. So again, right now, South Georgia doesn't have as many of the problems Florida does just because we are so well protected. But as we continue to expand, we might start having some more issues that we'll have to consider in the future. Which kind of brings us to why we should diversify as we continue expanding our industry. As of right now, about 60% of our citrus are satsumas, and there's a good reason for it. The satsumas have been doing really well here in the state, but that does really limit our market window because all of our satsumas are going to be ready right within the same amount of time, and that's really overloading the packing houses. So they're having to turn away fruit because they simply just cannot process all of it. And so by diversifying, not only are we expanding our market window, we can also reach a broader market as we start introducing other types of citrus. And so as we start diversifying and kind of expanding, there's several things we're going to consider and that we'll be talking about today. And we'll talk about each of these things in a little bit more detail, but we're going to consider the type of citrus, the cold hardiness, the harvest window, the fruit quality, and the rootstock compatibility. So as I mentioned, citrus type is going to be a big factor, and as of right now, there are a ton of different types being grown in the state. We just haven't really evaluated how they're going to do commercially and what the longevity of these different types are. A lot of these, they're in the very early stages. They might be in their first or second year of actual production, so we are going to need to do a lot more work to really evaluate all these different types. And then cold hardiness is obviously one of the most important things we have to consider because Georgia does get hit with some hard freezes and some cold weather. I mean, we are having some pretty cold weather this week. And a general rule of thumb is that the satsumas are the most cold hardy, followed by the mandarins and tangerines, and then the oranges, grapefruits, and then your lemons and limes. And this isn't an end-all be-all list. This is more of a general ranking, but it can kind of help you figure out what might be best suited for your area. We also have to consider when these fruit are going to be ready to harvest. So if you're putting in a ton of acreage, you want to make sure you can kind of space out your harvest window because you don't want to overload your crew as well as the packing houses by trying to get everything done within that same few weeks. Similarly, we want to make sure we're getting the fruit off the tree before we're having any sort of big freeze. So this was a photo Jake shared with me from the 2022 freeze. So as you can see, the tree on the right that had a ton of fruit did a whole lot worse than the tree on the left that didn't have any fruit. And those are the same kind of trees. They're both satsumas. So, and this has been proven time and time again that fruit on the tree does make them more susceptible to damage from any hard freezes we get. So it's going to be very important that we can get our fruit off the tree before the cold weather hits. All right, so fruit quality is also very important. Obviously, you want to make sure you're producing something that consumers are going to want. But from a packing standpoint, you also want to make sure that the peel integrity in the fruit is firm enough to withstand any sort of storage, transport, processing, packing, whatever you have to do to it. Also, the internal quality, obviously you want it to taste good. And there's a lot of things that go into the flavor of the fruit, but the easiest way to monitor a fruit's maturity is by looking at its Brix acid ratio. So Brix is a measure of the kind of carbohydrates, the sugar content, so it can give you an idea of the sweetness of your fruit. And then the acid is a measure of citric acid, so it's going to tell you how acidic. And so the ratio between the Brix and acid, it'll tell you kind of the balance. So a really low Brix and really high acid fruit is going to be like your lemons that are very acidic. And then a high Brix and low acid would tell you it's more of a sweet, so like a sweet orange, like the navels or juice oranges. And then one of the things that's kind of frustrating with citrus is that the internal quality isn't always synchronized with the external quality. And I know we've really seen that this year with the satsumas, where the internal quality may have been where you wanted it and they might have been good to eat starting late October, early November, but the color didn't develop until December, if it ever developed. And so we'll also be wanting to evaluate how well color can develop here in Georgia, especially when we do have the warmer falls like we did this year. And we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about rootstocks today, but just briefly, a lot of the rootstocks that we use will affect the growth habit. So you can have dwarfing rootstocks or really vigorous rootstocks that trigger a lot of growth. And then the rootstock can also affect the cold hardiness of your tree. So generally, the more vigorous the rootstock, the more susceptible they're going to be to cold damage. And then the rootstock can also affect things like the fruit quality, disease susceptibility, the age of the first crop, and your yield. So the rootstock's just as important as the top part of the tree, but today we're just going to focus on the scions. But just really briefly, I do want to mention that I've really been impressed by all the different rootstocks that growers are using up here in Georgia. I mean, this is just a short list of the ones I hear over and over and over again. But, and I'd say the Flying Dragon, Rubidoux, and the US lines are the ones I mainly hear the most. And again, I'm just really impressed that y'all already have so much diversity with the rootstocks. I know Florida's had issues in the past where they'll use one rootstock for everything, and then if that rootstock's susceptible to a disease, all their trees get wiped out when that disease does hit. Okay, so now we're going to move on to what y'all are actually interested in and talking about some cultivars that could work up here in Georgia. And I just really want to stress that these are in no way recommendations. This is me more, using y'all as a soundboard of these are potential cultivars we could use, and I'm just wanting some feedback from y'all on if this is something y'all would be interested in seeing more of in the future. Okay, so we're gonna start with the basic one, the one everybody knows and that is grown here the most, and that's the Owari Satsumas. And they're the most popular for a reason. They're very cold hardy, they've done really well during all the cold weather we've had. And they are a seedless fruit, and they tend to be small to medium size. They usually can fit in the palm of your hand, and they're definitely a snack fruit. And they have pretty good internal quality. They have a good balance of sweet and acid, so they also are very palatable. And the only real complaint I've seen with the Satsumas is that they do have some issues with color development. I know this year especially, the fruit might not have colored up until late November, even December. And then also, when there was issues with color development, the fruit were also getting puffy and starting to dry out. And from the best I can tell with Satsuma, that tends to be a common issue. And they think what it is the internal quality is peaking before your color develops. And so by waiting for the color to develop, your internal quality is starting to decrease. So your fruit's starting to dry out, it's starting to separate from the peel, and you're losing some of that flavor. And so that's something I'm hoping to work on in the future, is trying to figure out what's triggering this kind of puffiness and see if we can't get that figured out. And so like I said, this is color development may lag. So this picture is from a packing house in early December, and then these fruit were still on the trees. So you had some that were just nice and beautiful and ready to go, and then some that still needed, they were several weeks out from a nice orange color. And from what I've heard, the Satsumas tend to be ready September to October. Obviously this year we were a little late with the slow color development, but these are definitely more of a late fall fruit, so they would be ready before Christmas. And as far as the growth habit, I've noticed the Satsumas tend to like to grow out. So they have these long branches that end up on the ground, and then your fruit end up on the ground. So another thing we'll be working on is some pruning recommendations so that we can make sure the trees are staying up off the ground. And then we'll just briefly talk about a few other Satsuma cultivars. Like I said, the Owaris are the main ones I hear, but these are just a couple others I've heard of people having. Silver Hill is very similar to the Owaris. They just tend to have a lower acid content. The Brown Select, again, very similar. They just tend to be a little bigger, both the tree and the fruit. And then the Mihos, again, very similar. And then the Okitsus are a little later and a little sweeter than the Owaris. But like I said, we're not going to spend too much time on the Satsuma since we already have so many of those. So we'll move on to a few mandarins, and we're going to spend quite a bit of time on mandarins and tangerines because after the Satsumas, these are what I get the most questions about on what kind people can put in. So I've gotten quite a few questions about the sugar bells, which there's some in the back for y'all to try if you want. And these are technically a mandarin hybrid, and they're a cross between a clementine and a Mineola tangelo. And these are generally seedless, but they can get seedy depending on what their neighbor is. So we would kind of have to do some evaluations and make sure we're not putting in anything that's going to make your fruit really seedy and unpalatable. And these have gotten pretty popular because they are also HLB tolerant. And yeah, so with citrus greening, it's also called Huanglongbing or HLB. And so if I ever say HLB, I mean citrus greening. But the sugar bells are supposed to be greening tolerant. And that doesn't mean they won't get the disease. They will. They just won't show symptoms as quickly, and they'll still thrive for much longer. So they're becoming more popular down in Florida where they have much higher disease pressure. The sugar bells are also moderately cold hardy. After the 2022 freeze, Jake Price and several other extension agents went out and evaluated a ton of citrus trees to kind of see how they held up after such a really bad freeze. And I know with that one, it was several days in the low 20s and teens, so kind of a worst case scenario for citrus. And during that freeze, the sugar bells did lose a lot of their canopy, and they saw about 28% of trees had damage to the trunk or to structural branches. And the trees did bounce back, but what we saw during this past hurricane is that any branches that had any sort of freeze damage or cracks, those are the ones that got broken off during the hurricane. So anything with freeze damage is going to be weaker for any sort of subsequent climatic event. And that's true for everything, not just the sugar bells. So the sugar bells are also a very small fruit. They're small to medium size. They're the size of like the cuties that you see in the grocery store. and they also have a very intense internal flavor. They have a higher acid content than a lot of mandarins, but they also have a really high Brix content. So you get this really intense sweet and tart flavor. And it goes along with their really intense color development. You're gonna get that really nice red-orange color that you kind of expect from those like grocery store cuties or halos. These are also gonna be ready kind of the November, December frame, so they should be ready before Christmas and New Year, but they might get kind of close to that first freeze. And we'll see a picture of some other mandarins. I unfortunately don't have a picture of the sugar bell tree, but these tend to want to grow up. So the satsumas want to go out, the mandarins want to go up, and then they'll start spreading. But that does mean they'll need a different type of pruning to kind of train their canopy and kind of help thin out that inner part so you don't have such a dense canopy right there in the middle. And because they go straight up, some problems I know they had in Florida is when you had a really heavy crop load, you would start seeing some limb breakage. So we also need to train to make sure, you know, we're supporting those branches. And then these can get very tall as well. I've seen some pretty big sugar bells, so we might have to look into some rootstocks to make sure we're keeping these at a manageable size for here in Georgia. Okay, so another popular mandarin are the tangos, and that's what's in the big crate in the back. And these are another seedless mandarin. They're very small. Again, palm size or smaller, definitely a snack fruit. And these, again, have a pretty good internal quality, a nice balance of sweet and acid. And these will get ready kind of December to January. So these we harvested this week. So again, you're kind of getting close to that cutoff of they might get exposed to some freezing temperatures. And then here's a picture of some of the tangos. Actually, these are the tangos we picked earlier this week. So again, they have more of a vertical growth habit. So they're going to get tall. They will need to be topped to kind of keep them at a manageable height. And then they might need some training to get them to spread out a bit. These also tend to be moderately cold hardy. During that 2022 freeze, Jake and the other agents saw that the tangos lost about 30 to 40% of their canopy. And then they also had a fair amount of damage to their trunks and structural branches. So again, they were able to recover, but it'll take time for us to see the long-term effects of that freeze and how they hold up through future events. And the other problem with tangos is they can fall into an alternate bearing pattern. So you can have a year where there's super heavy crop load, but really small fruit, followed by a really thin crop load and big fruit. So it's bad for your yields and your fruit quality. So we would have to work on making sure we don't fall into that pattern. And we can do some like hand thinning or chemical thinning to hopefully help get that balanced out. All right, so the quiches are another one that I hear quite a bit. These I've heard a lot on the smaller scale. I've only talked to a few people that have them on a commercial scale. But they're another popular one because they are another seedless mandarin, and they are very small fruit. And these are almost bite-sized, some of the ones I've seen. So they can be very, very small, but they do section well, they do peel well, so they're very easy to eat. And they also tend to be a little on the sweeter side. They have a lower acid than some of the other mandarins, so it's going to be a very sweet mandarin. And these fruit also tend to be pretty soft. So in this picture, you can kind of see the sections are already pulling away from the peel, so that can cause issues during transport and packing and storing and everything because they are just such a soft fruit. These also will tend to be ready kind of November to January, so again, kind of at the very start of winter. So you should be able to get them off before Christmas and New Year. And like the other mandarins, these tend to want to grow up and then out. As for cold hardiness, I would say these are fairly cold hardy. The people I've talked to that had quiches, they did get burned back pretty bad by the freeze. It was usually to the trunk or to whatever area was being protected by their freeze protection method. So if we want to look into more of these, we would also really need to focus on some freeze protection methods to make sure these are staying really well protected. Let's see. Okay, so the next mandarin that's been really popular are the Shiranuis. And those, we have some of those in the back as well. And these are always really easy to identify because they have kind of a knob on the top. They're very distinctive, and you'll see them in the grocery store under the trademark Sumo. So there's already a commercial market for them, and people seem to really like them. They are another seedless mandarin, and these tend to be larger than the other than satsumas and the other mandarins. And they also have a pretty good balance of that sweet and acidic. And these will also kind of be, or they should be ready kind of December, January. So we're again kind of getting to that cutoff of right at the end of the year, right before we start getting some of this really, really cold weather. And like the other mandarins, they want to grow up. Okay, and then they're fairly cold hardy as well. During that 2022 freeze, they were losing about, or actually this year we lost a lot of their canopy, but they were only showing damage to about 10% of the trees as far as like freeze cracks and damage to branches in the trunk. And then they seem to have recovered well. So it's just kind of, we'll have to figure out what that sweet spot is of how much canopy can we lose and at what point does the trunk damage become so bad that they're never going to recover. But that's going to be a whole nother evaluation. Okay, so moving on to a couple tangerines. So the Sweet Frost is a UGA variety that was developed by Dr. Wayne Hanna to be cold tolerant. So it should be able to grow pretty well here in Georgia. It's also a seedless variety, and these fruit are very small. The ones I've had have been, again, bite-sized. So they're definitely a snack fruit. And the internal qualities, again, a pretty good balance of sweet and acid. And these, again, like the mandarins, tend to want to grow up. So this tree is on the Tifton campus. So you can see a lot of just upward shoots, and then it's starting to kind of bend outwards. And these can also be a pretty heavy bearer, but I haven't heard too much of people growing these on a commercial level. This has been more a tree here and there. The tangelos are another one I get a lot of questions about, and these are a tangerine grapefruit hybrid, and they have a distinct bell shape. And these are also on the larger size. They can get up to about 3 inches. And they're low-seeded. They will have some seeds, but it shouldn't be too overwhelming of an amount. And like I said, they're a large fruit. Internal-wise, again, kind of that nice balance of sweet and acid. And then these should be ready kind of October to February. And these have a really long harvest window, and I think what's happening is they might be ready starting October, but the longer they stay on the tree, the better they are. So waiting later, you might have a better fruit. And then like the others, these also have a more vertical growth habit. And like the other tangerines, they're fairly cold hardy. And with these, I've heard a lot of Orlando and Minneolos. Those tend to be the ones people gravitate towards. But I have heard some issues with the tangelos, especially I think it was in California, talking about they're not very self-fruitful. They do need cross-pollination. So we might have to work on that. There might be some plant growth regulators we could use to help increase fruit set if y'all are interested in the tangelos. And we do have issues with fruit set. And so just briefly, there's just a couple honorable mentions. I've heard mentioned a few times, but I haven't really seen people growing them. And those are the Dancy and Poncan tangerines, as well as Bingo and Marathon. And I know Bingo kind of blew up in Florida for a little while, and then they started pulling back just because the fruit were so small, it just wasn't worth it for them to go out and harvest them. So now that we've talked about a lot of the satsumas, mandarins, tangerines, we're going to kind of shift into the oranges. I have heard of quite a few people growing different types of navels here in Georgia. And the navels are really nice because they are a seedless sweet orange. And these can get pretty big, anywhere from 3, 4, 5 inches. So they're a good-sized fruit. And the internal quality, because it's a sweet orange, you're going to have higher bricks, lower acid, so it's definitely on the sweeter side. And these tend to be ready November, December. So again, it's going to be before the end of the year, so it should be before we get any of that really, really cold weather. And I have a picture of a sweet orange tree a little later, but the navels tend, and other sweet oranges tend to make more of a hedge shape. They like to grow out, up. They just grow in all directions, so they do need a lot of maintenance to keep them in a shape you want and to keep them manageable. And these are fairly cold hardy. They can survive drops to freezing, but they will definitely be damaged. And again, with that evaluation all the extension agents did after the 2022 freeze, the navels in general lost about 30 to 40% of their canopy, and then about 25% of the trees were showing cracks in the trunks or structural branches. So again, they will be damaged, but they do seem to come back okay. And as far as the varieties I hear the most would be the Glen, which I hope there's some still in the back that y'all can try. The Cara as well, which are the red flesh, although they tend to look pink on the inside. And then Washington, and then the Southern Frost is another UGA variety that was bred to be cold tolerant, so it should hold up pretty well here. Okay, so now let's shift over to juice oranges. I know we're focusing more on fresh market fruit, but the nice thing about juice oranges is they can kind of go either way. So with the Hamlins, those are the main ones I hear of being grown in Georgia, and there's just a few acreage of those. And the Hamlins are also seedless, and these can be medium to large. They're usually in that 2 to 3 inch range, but can get a little bigger. And I know these aren't the prettiest pictures, but this is from some of my work down in Florida. So these are greening fruit, and you can see why it's called greening, because these are mature, ready to go fruit. But the Hamlins tend to have a paler yellow juice, so they're usually supplemented with another juice if we want to go the juice route. But they're also pretty good to eat as well. Again, they're sweet orange, so you expect a higher Brix and lower acid. Again, this value is from Florida, so this is what your values look like with greening. I would expect a higher Brix and lower acid up here with healthy trees. And in Florida, the Hamlins are ready November to December, so I'd expect something similar here in Georgia, maybe even a little earlier. But the people I've talked to that have Hamlins, they seem to have done okay so far. All right, so going back to what I said about the sweet oranges, like the Nabels and these juice oranges, they are very hedge-like. So you can train them so your row just looks like one long hedge, which can make it easy to manage, but it does require a bit more work, a bit more pruning, topping, skirting, hedging, all of it. And then these have been fairly cold hardy. Again, they survive drops to the low 20s and below, but again, they will be damaged. Another one that's pretty popular down in Florida, it's gaining popularity, are the Parson Browns. And these fell out of fashion a long time ago because they are a seedy fruit. So Hamlin kind of replaced them, but since Hamlin is so susceptible to greening, they're kind of shifting back to the Parson Browns that tend to do a bit better. They're also ready a little earlier than the Hamlins, which has been great for the Florida market, but it also means they might be ready earlier here as well, which could definitely make sure they're safe from any cold weather we get during the winter. But other than that, the Parson Browns are pretty similar in quality to the Hamlins. Okay, so in Florida, the most popular juice variety are the Valencias. I do not think these are going to do well here. We're just going to talk about them because some of its cousins might do well here. So the Valencia, which you can see here, have a much brighter orange internal color, so the juice has a much nicer color and is more the color you expect of orange juice. The Brix also tends to be a little higher and the acid a little lower than the Hamlin, so it just tends to be a bit better of a juice orange. And it's prettier, so it might also do better for a fresh market, but they're not ready until April or June, so you're already starting your next season before your previous one's even finished, which means your fruit is definitely going to be exposed to any cold weather we might have here, which is why Valencia would not do well here. But there are early Valencia varieties, which are the same thing as Valencia. They're just ready kind of December to February. So it's the same quality as the Valencia, just ready before we kind of get that cold weather. And I know Jake's got a couple early Valencia trees, and he said his did really well during the 2022 freeze, had some damage, but were able to bounce back. Another kind of offshoot are the Valquarius, another one that's very, very similar to the Valencia, but they are ready kind of January to February. So a little later than the early Valencias, but again, kind of right at that sweet spot right before we get a lot of our really cold weather. So they're another possibility for up here. As for grapefruit, I do hear of people growing grapefruit, not as much as like the Satsumas or some of the other stuff. But with the grapefruit, I mainly hear the white flesh, the marsh cultivar, and then with the red flesh, the pink frost, which is a UGA variety, or red blush and ruby red. These grapefruits are also seedless. They tend to be much larger, kind of that 4 or 5, maybe even 6 inch range. And the internal quality, it is a grapefruit, so you do expect a lower Brix and a bit higher acid so that you get that distinct kind of acidic, bitter taste. And these are definitely ready November to December, so again, before kind of that threat of freeze. And then these are like the sweet oranges. They tend to want to grow up and out. They make big hedges, and these can get very, very tall. Down in Florida, I worked in a grove of grapefruit where the trees were 30 feet tall, and you could walk into the canopy and just stand in the middle of the tree, and the canopy has kind of a shell on the outside. So definitely a different structure to some of the satsumas and mandarins that are being grown here. And the grapefruit are also not very cold tolerant, with the exception of the pink frost that was bred for Georgia, and they did get hit really, really hard by the 2022 freeze. The agents saw that the trees lost about 50% of their canopy from the freeze, and about 60% of the trees had cracks in the trunk or structural branches. So they definitely took a beating. They seem to have recovered well, but only time will really tell us if they can hold up to future frost events or other climate events. Okay, so now we're shifting more into things I see definitely on a smaller scale. These tend to be really small scale farms, backyard growers, even like homeowners that have one tree in a pot that they bring in and out. But I do get a lot of questions about lemons and what can be grown here. And Dr. Hanna does have the Grand Frost lemon, which is a cold hardy lemon. It does have seeds, and it is a really nice big fruit, and it's a typical lemon, so it is definitely on the acidic side. And again, this has been more the homeowners, one or two trees here and there. Similarly, the other one I hear a lot is the Meyer, and it's considered the most cold hardy lemon. Even though it's not technically a true lemon, it does get lumped in with all the lemons. But it's just a really good lemon. It's low seeded, large, and it tends to be a little sweeter than some lemons, but you definitely still have that high acid. And then these are ready November to March, so you could probably get them off the tree before the really cold weather, but again, with the lemons, this tends to be more of a backyard grower type of situation. Okay, and then this is more of an honorable mentions because people don't really grow too many limes here, and the people I do hear of growing limes, it's usually in a greenhouse, or it's the one tree that they really, really protect in their backyard. So I don't think we would ever see a huge commercial market with these here. But I just wanted to mention a few that might have interest in the future. The finger limes, those are starting to gain some popularity down in Florida because they have shown some tolerance and maybe even resistance to greening. So Manjul Dutt down there has been doing a lot of work on those. And then these, they do have a market, but it's all like high-end dining, garnishes. It's a very small specialty market, but I do know that kids love these because the little juice sacks are almost like little candy, so it's like a sour Warhead or a Sour Patch Kid. They have Pop Rocks, yeah. So very intense flavor, fun to eat, but again, not gonna have a huge market. This might be, a small scale specialty thing. Similarly with lime quats, ring per limes, key limes, maybe a small market, but again, it's going to require so much protection here that I don't think it would ever be able to make it on a commercial scale unless we really change how we're doing citrus here. And so I wanted to leave a lot of time here at the end just to kind of have a general discussion and hear back from y'all on what you're growing, what you think may or may not have a potential here, and just kind of get some feedback also. So, if we can have questions, we can talk, whatever y'all want to do. But while we're doing that, I am going to leave this up here. It's just a quick little 3-minute survey, and it's just asking, what your relationship to citrus is. Are you a grower, hobbyist, industry, that kind of thing? What county you're in, so I can make sure my county map is nice and updated. And then also just ask for 3 varieties that you want to hear more about in the future or see more work being done on. It doesn't have to be one we talked about today. It can be whatever you want. But I'm just trying to get some variety evaluation trials going. So I'm wanting to make sure I'm focusing on what y'all are interested in and not just whatever I've been hearing. So I want to make sure I'm sticking with y'all. Okay, so thank y'all, and we can open the floor to questions, discussion, whatever y'all want. I don't remember the exact parentage. I know one is an orange. I don't remember the exact parentage though, but yeah. Which is probably why it does a little better than the true lemons. It's not. I would say most of the people that have the Meyers, Yeah, a lot of the people I've heard with Myers, somehow they have these massive trees. They're also old established trees that might have been here 15, 20 years, so that could be it. Or they've gotten a pot and they bring it inside every winter. So again, not a lot of promise on a commercial scale. I think you just kind of got to get lucky in just the right area for them to work out.
If there are no more questions, Dr. Sutton should be around. Y'all go enjoy the trade show. The lunch should be coming up as well. Like I said, thank you all for coming. We'll get back started after lunch.
Let me make sure I get. And just a reminder, I do have the information for the Commodity Commission. So the letter and the form you need to fill out if you do need to report that. So come see me if you need those forms.